Hello there, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews. This is my review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 2, Children of the Comet. And I keep wanting to call it Children of the Corn, but that is a totally different thing. So first off, let me start with the standard spoiler warning. If you have not seen this episode, then you do not want to watch this video. End of story. Okay, now let's get into this episode. So, Strange New Worlds continues to impress me with the way that it is able to tell good character stories and also just make me feel like I'm watching old Star Trek, but in an updated way. And, God, it's so good. It feels so good to wake up early in the morning, make myself a cup of coffee, snuggle up with a blanket, and watch a good Star Trek show. It's not something that I had the previous 10 weeks with that show that shall not be named that I'm glad is over now. It is so nice to have a good Star Trek show to wake up to on Thursday mornings. And one thing I was thinking as I was watching this episode is that I feel that already that Strange New Worlds is the most accessible Star Trek show in the modern era, the most easy access point for new people discovering Star Trek for the very first time. I think much more so than Discovery or even Lower Decks, and definitely more so than Picard. And you could say Prodigy, is good for the little kids to access Star Trek for the first time, I guess. But I don't know. I was a little kid when I accessed TOS for the first time. And so I think little kids can watch this, quite honestly, because I was when I was watching TOS. So I just think that because it really introduces you to the world of Star Trek, what Star Trek is all about, more than any of the other modern shows. So as the years go by, in 20 years from now, it'll be interesting to see how many people first discovered Star Trek through Strange New Worlds. Because you look at the 90s Star Trek and the early 2000s Star Trek, I think I have met at least one person who accessed Star Trek first through each of those shows from the 90s and 2000s. So everyone has their Star Trek, what got them into Star Trek. So I think it's really cool, and I think Strange New Worlds is a good show for that purpose. Now, as for this particular episode, I am really enjoying how this show is able to focus on one particular character and yet still manage to have an ensemble episode. It's something that the original series never really did so well. It was always Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, basically. Next Generation was able to do it from time to time. But they also, sometimes you would just focus just on Worf or just on Data, and you don't have a good ensemble episode. But there are some episodes, such as the finale, All Good Things, which was about Picard, but was a great ensemble episode as well. And I think that's a really neat trick. I love it when Star Trek episodes are able to pull that off, and they haven't often done it. And I think this show has already done it twice, and I really enjoy that. Of course, this episode is about Uhura, and we get more backstory for Uhura in one line than we've gotten in 50 years of history. And I'll talk about that once I get more into the details of this episode. But it was still a pretty strong Pike episode. We're continuing on with the storyline that we started last week with him facing the foreknowledge of his death, although it wasn't as central focus as it was last week. Spock had a sneaky good storyline as well, which I'll talk about. And Ortegas, we saw her a little bit more in this episode than last week, which I'm quite enjoying. I'm really digging this character. And we get our first introduction to Himmer, though he kind of was just in the beginning and then disappears. I am waiting for that Himmer episode that I know we will get because I'm really interested in this character. But all in all, a great ensemble episode where both storylines mattered. That's another thing that Star Trek has often failed on, especially in the 90s and 2000s Star Trek, where you have an A plot that is good and sometimes the B plot is awful. There are some episodes even where the B plot is better than the A plot, and they're usually completely disjointed and unrelated. I love how there was a very clear A plot and B plot that were definitely separate, but they were in conjunction with each other. They were related. And Star Trek has pulled that off as well before, but oftentimes they don't. And so I really, really enjoyed that this show is already able to do some things that Star Trek didn't regularly do in its history. So I'm really loving all of that. So once again, a strong episode. I would say personally I like this one better than last week's just because I think the story that they told was more interesting. As I said last week, Captain Pike going down and making a speech and all of a sudden war is cured on a planet. I think that is a little oversimplifying how war and conflict actually are. So that wasn't my favorite thing in the world. This is a much more nuanced, much more interesting story that involves multiple characters, not just Uhura. So I really, really love this. I'm really, really, really digging this show. So let me go ahead now and dive into some of the details of this episode. Okay, I want to dive into the details, but before I get into the episode proper, I just have to make a little nitpick about something Paramount Plus has chosen to do, which is, do we need a previously on for an episodic show? I mean, I know that the character stories will be continuous, which I really appreciate, and I have said that I want them to do that. But do we need a previously on? I mean, it makes sense for a serialized show, but you can't skip it. Like, that drives me crazy about Paramount Plus. You can't skip the recap and you can't skip the intro. And I don't want to skip this intro because I love this intro, but once I start doing my rewatch of Enterprise, I want that goddamn skip intro button, and I'm gonna have to freaking fast forward to that awful theme song, and then I'm gonna fast forward too far, and I'm gonna have to rewind to get back to the episode. So Paramount Plus, you need to put a skip recap and skip intro button, and honestly, you don't need a previously on for an episodic show, in my opinion, but whatever. As long as there's a skip intro button or a skip recap button, I don't care. Anyways, I had to get that out of the way. It has nothing to do with the episode itself. So, getting into the episode now, I loved the opening sequence with Uhura being taken to the captain's dinner for the first time, and Ortega's playing the little joke on her, where she said, "No, I said you might want to wear the dress uniform," and Uhura knew what was happening. She's like, "Oh, you're playing a little practical joke on me." She's like, "Yeah, totally." I don't know if they use the word hazing in this episode or if I just heard it from another review, but I don't think hazing is a good word for this kind of thing, or at least we need to come up with two different words, because there's hazing that can really trigger people, that people would have issue with, that I really understand why. And I'm thinking more of like the frat boy type hazing, where you're doing something unusually cruel and mean-spirited to the person, or asking them to do cruel and mean-spirited things to other people and to get them in trouble. That kind of hazing, or physically harming a person, that kind of hazing should be triggering and is very problematic. But this isn't that. This is all in good fun. This is completely harmless. And everybody knew why Uhura was wearing a dress uniform. Even Pike is like, "Oh, dress uniform! Ha ha!" I loved his reaction. I thought that was great. And just to see them kind of all hanging out and being loose with each other, and seeing that this is a crew that really hangs out and they bond together, and Uhura coming into that for the first time. I loved it. It was all really fantastic. And in this scene, we get more backstory to Uhura, like I said at the beginning, than we've gotten in 50 years. I don't know if her parents had ever been mentioned before. So for the first time, we find out her parents were both killed. So we had no idea. And I'm actually really starting to dig this version of the character. I had some trepidation about using legacy characters because you're really stepping on canon. But I feel like all of this really fits. And I feel like having a young Uhura who's not sure of herself and is not sure that she wants to be in Starfleet really works and really fits with what we learn of the character later. She also is able to sing, which she did in the original series. She's a really good singer. And I wanted Spock to bust out the lyre at the end of the episode, though. You remember that scene in the original series? It was one of the early episodes, because they only did this in the beginning of the show, where Uhura was singing and Spock was like playing the lyre. It's like a little harp, for those of you who don't know what a lyre is. It was like, and it was like the most 1960s thing I've ever seen in my life, because she's going like this. She's singing. But I wanted Spock to bust out the lyre at the end of this episode. That would have been great. But anyways, I am really seeing that these two characters connect, and because they didn't really explore her backstory, it's wide open territory. Like, they can say whatever they want because it was never really explored before, and it all fits. I still have problems with Nurse Chapel because I love this character as she is in this show, but unfortunately, it doesn't at all match up with how she, basically had no personality in the original series. So I feel like it's almost sad to me that she's behaving this way, Nurse Chapel, because it's like she got a lobotomy at some point or something happened to her, or her personality got sucked away. I don't know. I wish it was a different character. But Uhura, I am really digging this character, and it's kind of the classic story that we've seen many times, not only in Star Trek but all over fiction, where you have the young person trying to find their way, but it was told very well here. And Spock makes a surprisingly good kind of mentor figure. Love the scene where she, she's like, what was that? That's supposed to be some kind of pep talk, which we saw in the trailer. And then he does a better version of it. And he's always here to instill confidence in her. And they end up working together really well on all of this. So love me some Uhura all throughout that episode. But starting with that opening scene in the beginning and how she fits into the crew. So all of that was really great. Now, as for some of the other characters in this episode, as I mentioned before, Spock has a pretty good episode overall. He is a little more reminiscent of the Leonard Nimoy Spock than he was in Discovery, and I probably talked about that last week too, because we're seeing Spock go on his journey to become more logical and more of the Vulcan that we see in the original series. And Ethan Peck is doing a fantastic job. And in this episode, while Uhura is trying to find her way, Spock, I think, is trying to find his way as more of a leader, more of a mentor figure than perhaps he's had to be in the past. And he's still trying to figure things out, too. And he does a fantastic job. Now, my one nitpick with the whole Spock thing is the scene in the end where he goes, ha, 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 ha. Well, sometimes things just go so badly that you have to laugh. That really threw me off, and I actually couldn't wrap my finger around it. Why that threw me off at first is not just because he's Vulcan, he was showing emotion or whatever, he was laughing, because Spock has shown emotion before, he will again. That's not a big deal. I thought about it, and I realized why it threw me off is because that's a Data thing. That's not a Spock thing, where... And in fact, it's a classic Data trope that they've done many, many times throughout the Next Generation, where at the beginning of the episode, Data goes, query, please explain to me why you humans are doing this and this and this. And they said, well, Data, humans do this and then this is why, and this is what we do. And then at the end of the episode, Data will emulate that, and everybody gets a good laugh because Data is doing the thing that the humans did. And it makes sense for Data because Data wants to be human. He is working toward being more human, whereas Spock is kind of working more the other way. In fact, when Spock and Data meet in the Next Generation, the episode Unification, they have kind of this really cool discussion about that. Spock is going the other way. He's trying to become more logical. He's not trying to become more human. So for him to do what Data does and like try to emulate what the humans do didn't really make a lot of sense to me. It was cute and all, but it didn't make a whole ton of sense. Now, I've also touched on Pike at the beginning of this. We are continuing on with him still trying to figure things out. And this time he gets to have a conversation with Una, a couple conversations actually with Una about it, because she was largely absent from that conversation last week. And she's telling him, hey, maybe things can be changed. Maybe that's not how your fate isn't written in stone. Of course, we know that it is, unless they're going to change canon, which I can't imagine they're going to. But I find that interesting, and I find it interesting that he's still going through that. As I said last week, I didn't want it to just be, okay, that's that, and now I'm perfectly fine, which is something that Star Trek has had the tendency to do in the past. So I like that this is ongoing. Other characters, Ortegas, even though a lot of the lines that she had in this we'd seen in the trailer, like, I think that went pretty well. And then there's the exchange about her being a good pilot, but I did enjoy her, especially in the beginning, and the way that she's kind of quote-unquote hazing her. We get a little bit more of her. I'm looking forward to getting even more of this character. Now, let me talk a second about the story, because I did say that I find it better and more interesting than last week's. And actually, in some ways, it was a little bit reminiscent of the climax of Star Trek Discovery, season 4, when they're trying to figure out a way to communicate with these aliens. Similar kind of thing. This one also involves math, but this also involves music as well. Of course, if you know me at all, you must know that I love music, and I love anything that really gets into how music is deeper than just a song, how music can be connected to math, how music can be connected to communication. I absolutely love that shit. So I was really into this episode, and I was really into how they figured it all out. And as I talked about at the top, I liked how there were two competing A plots and B plots that were also cooperative, that also joined together, and they were kind of separate but related, and I really like that. And I actually did kind of like those the shepherd aliens, the religious zealots. I think they really worked for this episode. I feel like that is something that could easily be done very poorly, and I do like that they're not human looking, and I also like the aesthetics of the aliens who are on that planet too. I love how they're making these aliens in this show not all just be bumpity head aliens, not just humans with like ridges on their nose or whatever. I'm really enjoying that, and the confrontation between the Enterprise and the ship really worked for me, especially how Pike had to do a little bit of outside of the box thinking with Spock, do a little bit of outside of the box thinking in order to solve the problem. You're not going to be able to take these aliens on head on. They have superior firepower, so what are you going to do? So I thought that worked out brilliantly, and I really, really enjoyed that storyline as well. Okay, so I think that about covers the broad strokes, the big points that I wanted to touch on in this review. Overall, I did really, really enjoy the episode, and I'm really digging this show. It's so nice to watch a good Star Trek show again. So, let me go ahead and give my rating out of 10, 1 being the lowest possible score, 10 being the highest possible score. And so last week I gave the episode an 8, and I feel like this episode is a little better, but also at the same time, like, we're still in the beginning, we're still setting the groundwork, we're still introducing characters, so I feel like 9s and 10s should be saved for middle to late season when we're really, really getting into the nitty gritty, really getting into the good stuff and not just laying the groundwork still. So I can't quite give it a 9. So therefore, it is only logical that I give this episode, season 1, episode 2, Children of the Comet, an 8.5. An 8.5, not quite a 9 because I got to reserve that for episodes that are really getting down and dirty and no longer just laying the groundwork. And at the same time, it was better than last week, which I gave an 8. I really enjoyed the story, really enjoyed the character work. I'm digging this show. I don't know how many times I can say that. Not enough. Anyway, an 8.5. Let me go ahead and wrap this up now. Thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe if you have not already. Hit that like button. Hit the bell for the notifications. Do all that wonderful stuff. I will be continuing on with my Strange New Worlds reviews. I will be back next week to review episode 3. So I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.